How do you start with LabNav? First, you need to make sure Spark Systems Enterprise Architect is already installed. Then you can install the LabNav add-in on top of the Spark Systems modeling platform. For now, we will see the case where the installation is done manually, for an individual user. To start the installation, you go to your LabNav package, LabNav add-in, installer. Double-click on the LabNav for Spark's MSI. And you simply accept the default options. Now that the LabNav add-in is installed, you can see that a new item, called the LabNav License Manager, was added on your desktop. The type of license can be either floating licenses or fixed licenses. If you purchased floating licenses, then your system's administrator first need to register these licenses on a license server. There are instructions on the Spark Systems website about using the floating license server. If you purchased a fixed license certificate, then you register it using the LabNav License Manager. Once the LabNav License Manager is open, you can simply drag and drop a license certificate on its window, and you're done. You must choose, of course, the right license certificate. It should have the name add-in inside. Once your licenses are installed, you can go to the LabNav repositories folder. Repositories are always provided as access files. The actual set of repositories available in your LabNav add-in package depends on the edition that you purchased. The Lite and standalone editions come with an extra Lite startup repository. This is a stripped-down version of the fully-fledged startup repository. This extra Lite repository copes with the Microsoft Access database limitations. The repositories with a name ending with SQL Server have more features and content. They are meant to be transferred to SQL Server. Now, you can still use them as access files. But you must know that charts won't open, and calculation is disabled. These features require more than what Access SQL is capable of. Let's open, for example, the sample repository. You can see then your license appearing on the splash window. Once the repository is open, you can look at some sample models. This one shows an option for deploying LabNav on some logical node. And this node is connected to some network. You can see how these components communicate with each other. Then you can, for example, look at some functional taxonomy here, with some mappings between applications to these enterprise functions, and with some redundancies. This is how it was modeled manually. You can look at how diagrams are automatically generated. So, here, you can see again applications realizing functions, but this time it was automatically generated. You can see that you can regenerate if you want. I delete. I regenerate. And here you go. This is on-demand generation. You can also generate and calculate anything periodically, during the night, for instance. You can use the LabNav PowerShell for this. To start creating your own content, you make a copy of the startup repository. You give it the name you want. You open that repository by double-clicking on it. And you can see that you have, now, a predefined structure. That covers all aspects of strategy, enterprise architecture, solution architecture and analysis. The different folders include playpens, where each team member has its own playpen. You have also the visible enterprise, where all the shared catalogs are located. You have the vision, that includes the strategy definition, and the strategy execution. You have the projects, the ongoing projects, and the delivered projects. You have architecture management, where you can define what is assigned to which architects. There are predefined dashboards. This folder contains the LabNav configuration. You can configure document generation, Excel and CSV generation, diagram generation, value calculation, the mandatory views, and the meet handle. There are also some reusable items, like legends and SQL queries. Automatic legends are used to automatically color your items in your diagrams, following some element and connector properties. As a new user, let's say I want to learn modeling with LabNav. I want to create some new content, and I want my LabNav modeling experience to be as simple as possible. In my modeling workspace, the most useful windows should be open. This is called the workspace layout. There is one already there for me. It is called the LabNav workspace layout. I can also create my own workspace layout if I want. Then, for creating new diagrams, I want to see only the LabNav diagram types. No more. This was already done when LabNav was installed. But I might have changed this, for whatever reason. To focus on the LabNav diagram types, I simply activate the LabNav perspective. Now, I create a playpen for my own. This is my personal container to start modeling. Let's say I want to create a new diagram. A diagram showing application interactions. So, I create an application interactions diagram. Let's create some applications, and then some flow of information between these applications. If you are not sure what type of diagram to create, then go to the guidance website. Then look at the flows of Level 3 viewpoints. You can also see them all by category. In architecture, viewpoint is a more general term for designating a diagram type. Each viewpoint has its own documentation. If you already have some existing content somewhere else, you can import that content. And you can also transform the language onto LabNav if needed. Using the LabNav language transformer, you can always transform to, and from, any other language.